When we step into the Restoration period, one name towers above the rest: John Dryden. Born in 1631, Dryden became the leading poet, playwright, critic, and translator of his age. In 1668, he was appointed England's first poet laureate. His influence was so great that the late 17th century is often called the Age of Dryden. Pause here and note this. Samuel Johnson called him the father of English criticism, asked in exam. Johnson admired his clarity, precision, and argumentative power in prose, crediting him with shaping modern English criticism and prose style. Later, T.S. Eliot placed Dryden alongside Milton, even comparing him with French stylists like Jean Racine and Charles Baudelaire, asked in exam. Sir Walter Scott went further, calling him Glorious John, a title that stuck. Dryden's career also shows how literature and politics were inseparable in his time. In 1658, his heroic stanzas upon the death of the Lord Protector praised Oliver Cromwell. But after the Restoration, he switched allegiance, writing Astrea Redux in celebration of King Charles II's return. This adaptability marked much of his career. One of his most important poems came in 1682, Religio Laici, meaning a layman's faith asked in exam. Here he defended Anglicanism in elegant philosophical verse. Yet, just 5 years later, in The Hind and the Panther, he shifted again, this time defending Catholicism. His writings reveal not just personal conviction, but the turbulence of England's religious and political landscape. Dryden was also a master satirist. In Mac Flecknoe, published in 1682, he attacked the decline of literary standards. He mocked the rise of hack writers and publishers, lamenting the prostitution of literature in an age where art was being cheapened for profit. So, when you think of Dryden, keep these anchors in mind. First, poet laureate, father of English criticism, asked in exam. Religio Laici, defending Anglicanism, asked in exam. Mac Flecknoe as a satire, and his adaptability between Cromwell, Anglicanism, and Catholicism. His career shows us how literature can be both timeless art and a mirror of shifting power. Let's step back to the year 1668, when John Dryden wrote his most important critical work, an essay of dramatic poesy. Interestingly, he composed it during the plague of 1666, and instead of a dry treatise, he shaped it as a lively dialogue between 4 characters, each defending a different view of drama. Pause here, because this part has been asked in exam. The first character, Eugenius, modelled on Charles Sackville, defends the moderns, praising them for inventive plots and liveliness. The second, Crites, based on Sir Robert Howard, stands firmly with the ancients, believing their authority unmatched. The third, Lycidius, representing Sir Charles Sedley, admires the French for their strict observance of the Aristotelian unities. And finally, Neander, whose name literally means new man, is recognized as Dryden's own voice, asked in exam. Neander acknowledges the discipline of the French unities, but insists the English excel in something greater: character development and dramatic vitality. It's here that Dryden delivers his famous praise, calling Shakespeare the greatest soul, ancient or modern. He even described Shakespeare as the Homer of English drama and Ben Jonson as its Virgil, asked in exam. Another fascinating debate in this essay concerns rhyme versus blank verse. Should plays be written in rhyme? Dryden defends rhyme as a legitimate form for drama, but he also acknowledges the brilliance of the Elizabethans who wrote in blank verse. Can you recall why this text matters so much? Because Dryden does something remarkable. He blends national pride in English theatre with deep respect for classical authority. By drawing on Aristotle's poetics as filtered through Renaissance and French criticism, he positioned drama not as mere entertainment, but as a poetic art form equal to the epic. So the takeaway for an essay of dramatic poesy is this: it balances ancients and moderns, rhyme and blank verse, French discipline, and English vitality. And in doing so, it lays the foundation for English dramatic criticism. Let's step back into the world of neoclassical criticism, where poetry was not just an art, but a discipline shaped by rules, order, and moral purpose. Three figures stand out here: Nicolas Boileau Desprez, John Dennis, and Alexander Pope. We begin with Nicolas Boileau Desprez. Often simply called Boileau, he was to French poetry what Horace was to Rome. His most important work, The Art of Poetry, published in 1674, is a direct echo of Horace's Ars Poetica, and yes, this has been asked in exam. In this treatise, Boileau set out rules for poetic language, genres, and composition, becoming the lawgiver of French classicism. His influence spread far beyond France. Sir William Sommer and John Dryden translated his work into English, and through this, Boileau's ideas helped shape Alexander Pope's essay on criticism. So, the English Augustan age owes much to this French codifier of order and balance. Now, let's move to John Dennis, an English critic and dramatist, often remembered for his fiery opinions. Dennis was one of the first Englishmen to theorize the sublime. He wrote about it in 1693 after experiencing the Alps on his grand tour. For him, poetry's greatness lay in its power to move the emotions and serve a moral purpose. His works, including The Advancement and Reformation of Modern Poetry and The Grounds of Criticism in Poetry, stressed that literature should elevate virtue and stir passion. But Dennis was also known for his quarrelsome side. In his pamphlet Reflections, Critical and Satirical, published in 1711, he sharply attacked Alexander Pope's essay on criticism, accusing him of confusing nature and rules without defining either, and this attack too was asked in exam. Despite the controversies, Dennis left a lasting mark by tying aesthetics to morality and the sublime. Finally, we come to Alexander Pope, the master poet of the Augustan age. Born in 1688, Pope became one of the most influential voices of the Enlightenment. A devout Catholic who worked tirelessly despite ill health, he perfected the heroic couplet and gave us works like The Rape of the Locke, The Dunciad, an essay on criticism, an essay on man, and his translations of Homer. Pope believed that poetry should embody balance, decorum, and reason hallmarks of Augustan poetry. Asked in exam. His wit and satire exposed folly, but his verse also carried moral weight, turning poetry into cultural commentary. Imagine being only 23 years old and publishing one of the most important works of literary criticism in English. That's exactly what Alexander Pope did with an essay on criticism, first published in 1711, later revised in 1736. Written in heroic couplets, this poem stands as both a warning against bad criticism and a guide to what makes the ideal critic. And yes, its core ideas have been asked in exam. Pope divides the work into three sections. The first attacks faulty criticism. He points to prejudice, blind dependence on authority, superficial reading of poets, and above all, pride. Remember this famous line, "Pride, the never-failing vice of fools." Asked in exam. For Pope, pride was the root of error, almost satanic in its corruption of judgment. The second section explores this pride in depth, showing how it distorts taste and prevents clarity. And the third section moves to remedies. Pope tells critics to embrace humility, balance, and reason, the very hallmarks of Augustan poetry, asked in exam. He stresses that nature understood as an eternal principle of order and proportion should guide judgment, and that the imitation of the ancients remains the highest standard of literary taste. Pause here and note this. Pope also believed authors do not invent brand new ideas but present existing thoughts with clarity and beauty. Asked in exam. The brilliance of this poem lies in its aphorisms, short, memorable maxims that still circulate today. Can you recall some? To err is human, to forgive divine. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Pierian spring. Each of these lines was asked in exam and reveals Pope's gift for condensing wisdom into art. He also reminded us, true ease in writing comes from art, not chance, as those move easiest who have learned to dance. For Pope, great writing was not divine accident, it was disciplined craft. Of course, an essay on criticism wasn't free from controversy. John Dennis, a critic targeted by Pope's satire, lashed back with pamphlets. But Pope responded with mockery in the Dunciad, solidifying his reputation as the sharp-witted voice of the Augustan age. So, what does this work really give us? A vision of good taste asked in exam, the virtues of the ideal critic asked in exam, and a warning against shallow or biased criticism asked in exam. After an essay on criticism, Alexander Pope turned to a much larger project, nothing less than the human condition itself. Between 1733 and 1734, he published an essay on man, a philosophical poem written in heroic couplets. Its aim, to vindicate the ways of God to man, a direct echo of John Milton's famous line from Paradise Lost, where Milton set out to justify the ways of God to man. And yes, this connection has been asked in exam. The central theme of Pope's poem is the moral order of the universe and our fragile place within it. He identified pride as humanity's original sin. Pride blinds our judgment, leads us to rebel against the natural order, and makes us think the world exists only in relation to ourselves. Can you see the danger here? It's arrogance and anthropocentric blindness that distorts both morality and humility. Now, here's something important though. Pope draws on Christian ideas like the fall. The poem is not exclusively Christian. Instead, it is a universal meditation. He urges readers to seek moral self-salvation, to broaden perspective, and to resist prejudice. Pride narrows vision, humility expands it. Pause here and note this through an essay on criticism and an essay on man. Pope perfected a balance between classical tradition and Enlightenment rationalism. His verse was satirical, yes, but it was also philosophical. His mastery of the heroic couplet, his devotion to balance, decorum, and clarity made him more than just the leading poet of his age. He became the enduring spokesman of Augustan ideals. So when you think of an essay on man, remember this: pride as original sin, humanity's arrogance, the echo of Milton's Paradise Lost asked in exam, and Pope's attempt to explain humankind's place in the vast moral order of the universe. In the early 18th century, one name stands out in shaping English prose, journalism, and even public taste: Joseph Addison. Born in 1672, Addison was not just an essayist, but also a poet, playwright, political writer, and above all, a pioneer of periodical culture. Along with his lifelong friend Richard Steele, he founded the Tatler in 1709 and the Spectator in 1711, followed later by the Guardian. Remember this sequence because it has been asked in exam. What made these journals revolutionary was their style. They moved away from the ornate, heavy manner of 17th century prose and adopted a clean, straightforward tone. Their mission was clear: to instruct as well as to delight. Addison himself famously said, "I have brought philosophy out of closets and libraries to dwell in tea tables and coffee houses," asked in exam. That line perfectly captures his goal, making moral and intellectual reflection available to ordinary readers in everyday spaces. Pause here and note this: Addison's influence also extended into literary and political society. He was part of the Kit Kat Club, a gathering of writers and statesmen. Members included Addison, Richard Steele, and William Congreve, and this too has been asked in exam. Among his many essays, one of the most celebrated is On the Pleasure of Imagination, published in The Spectator in 1712. In this essay, Addison explored how imagination could refine both individuals and society. Properly cultivated, the imagination, he said, produces what he called a polite imagination. This was the ability to enjoy refined, elevated pleasures that lifted one above vulgarity. For Addison, imagination was a sort of effortless contemplation, an immediate ascent to the beauty of an object. Notice how democratic that sounds, he argued. You didn't need wealth or formal education to enjoy this kind of pleasure. What mattered was sensibility, the ability to appreciate beauty with refinement. Sight, for him, was the highest of the senses. Why? Because it offered the widest variety of ideas, could act at a distance, and sustained the mind without fatigue. But at the same time, he warned against sensual pleasures which he dismissed as vulgar distractions from higher forms of joy. In this way, Addison's essays were never just literary, they were moral and social. By shaping imagination, he hoped to safeguard virtue, refine public taste, and guide society toward balance and moderation. So, when you think of Joseph Addison, remember the Tatler, the Spectator, and the Guardian asked in exam, his mission to bring philosophy to tea tables asked in exam, his Kit Kat Club Association asked in exam, and his idea of the polite imagination as a force to elevate both literature and society.